This is part 4 of our Learn Lightroom 5 series. In part 1, we processed this photograph in the Develop module of Lightroom 5, and I showed you these controls where you could process the photograph. In part 2, I went over the tools and we continued processing the same photograph. In part 3, we processed this photograph from beginning to end. This is the before picture, this is the after picture, and I showed you my whole workflow and how I processed that photograph. In this episode, we're going to be processing a photo into black and white, and I chose this photograph of the lighthouse. And I'm going to show you my entire workflow on how I would process this photograph. First things I would do, the horizon's a little crooked, and as you can see, it's got a little bit of a curve in it from my lens. So I go to lens corrections right away and enable profile corrections, remove chromatic aberration, and then I'll hit auto, and auto should straighten it, and yeah, it did, and it made the verticals vertical and the horizontals horizontal. So that's fine. We're done with that panel. Next thing I do, I go right into the basic panel, and I do what I do to every photograph. I go right to highlights and I turn it all the way down, and I go to the shadows and I turn those all the way up. Next, if I wanted, I would put a graduated filter in here, which is this control right here, but I'm not going to do it in this photograph because the lighthouse is here and I don't want the graduated filter to affect the lighthouse, so I'm going to deal with the sky in a different way a little later. So we'll jump right, I set my white and my black point, and the way you do that is you hold the Alt key in when you're on the white, and when you touch the white, click down on it, the whole screen turns black. Move it to the right until you just get some something showing, the whites, oranges. But I usually just let it barely come through. And even then I just kind of readjusted it. There we go. Now the blacks is the similar thing. You hold the Alt key down. When you click on the black slider, the whole screen turns white this time. Move it to the left until you get some blacks. And I usually bring this one a little further. And that's that. Now we set the white and black point. Now the next thing I would do is exposure and contrast. And I do think the picture's a tad bright, so I'm going to bring exposure down just a little bit, probably less than a third of a stop, and I'm going to bring contrast. And now we're processing this in black and white eventually, so I want it contrasty. I want this picture to be like a real stormy sky and something out of a book. So I'm going to bring contrast up fairly high, around 38. I'm going to bring clarity up fairly high too, because that will add to the effect once it's in black and white. Vibrance and saturation I don't have to do anything in because we're going to send this to black and white. Now how we're going to do that is we go to this panel right here. It's the HSL color and black and white panel, and we simply just click on the black and white, and it turns the photograph into black and white. Now you'll see these colors here, and what you're actually doing when you slide these is if you're, for instance, it's easier if I show you. We know there's blue in the sky. If I take the blue and I make it darker, you can see how it's making the sky darker. And that's what I want. I want the sky a little more dramatic. So I'm going to bring the blue slider pretty far down. I don't want anything to be absolute black in the sky though. So right about there is good. Now the other ones in this photo, if you had something you knew you had a red flower or something, when you adjusted red it would do something, but in this photograph it's not as clear cut outside of the blue. So we'll just try them out. Move red to the right, move red to the left. The only thing I really see affecting is this sign here, and so I'm not going to mess with it. So double click on it and it puts it right back where it was. Orange, move to the right, and I see it's brightening up this area here, and I kind of like that. See? So we're going to brighten that up by moving the orange slider to the right. Yellow is probably going to do that same area, I would imagine, because usually yellows and oranges are together. And it is, so I'm going to bring that up a little bit. Green, I'm not sure there's much green in here. Move it around. I see a little bit happening in the water in the foreground and on the face of the lighthouse. So I'll bring it up a little, brighten those up a little bit. Aqua should probably affect a little bit more like we did with the blue, and it does. So I'll bring that up a tiny bit. Purple similarly, although maybe not. Yeah, not really much going on there, and I'll leave that alone. And I doubt magenta is going to do anything. No, and it doesn't. Okay, so now we adjusted the black and white mix by adjusting these color sliders. So I'm done with that panel. I do even want a little more drama in the sky. So I'm going to go to the tone curve, and I'm just going to pull down on the tone curve a little bit and bring the whole picture a little darker even. Okay, now it's starting to shape up to more of what I want it to be. This part in here, the base of the lighthouse is pretty dark. So I'm going to use the brush tool, and I'm going to set it to exposure. And you can see I have a previous setting on there, and I'm just to reset it, hold the Alt key down. You'll see how this effect turns into reset. Click on it and everything's zeroed out. Now I'm going to bring up the exposure maybe a stop. See what that looks like. And I want auto masking on so that it doesn't bleed as readily into other things, and I want the brush to be feathered because I don't want it to look like a white line. I want it to look more blurred at the edges. Now you use the left bracket key to make it smaller and the right bracket key to make it bigger. So we're going to make it a little smaller, and we're just going to paint on here. And maybe up in here a little bit. No, I didn't like that. So now I hold the Alt key down, and you can see how this plus turns into a minus, and that means we're going to be erasing what we just did. And that's good. I think I like it like that. Maybe a little bit more in there. That's good. Okay, so we're done with that. You could just hit it again and it will close. Or down here it has close. If you messed it all up, you could hit reset. But this, I could turn it on and off to see the effect. There it is off. There it is on. And I kind of like it, so I'm going to leave it. Alright, now the next thing we could do is the detail panel. This is where we sharpen it and get rid of any noise. And inherent when you do black and white is you get a lot of luminance noise in the photograph. And yeah, as I look at it now, I don't really see too much. But I'm going to bring sharpening up. We're going to, the part 5 of this series, I'll be going over this panel to show you how to set it exactly for sharpening and noise reduction. If you don't really, want to worry about all the technical details about it, I mentioned before, set sharpening around 70 and don't even mess with these 3 sliders, and set your luminance to around 40 for the noise reduction. That gives it a nice mix. Alright, now alright, we sharpened it, we got some noise reduction. It's still not really where I want. So I'm gonna go back into the basic panel, and I'm gonna boost contrast even more. And I'm gonna boost clarity a little more. Alright, now it's getting closer. Now the water, in my opinion, is a little too clear, a little too sharp. So I'm going to blur that. Now how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take a brush. We're going to click New. I'm going to reset it by holding the Alt key in and hitting that reset. Then I'm going to I'm going to take clarity, I'm going to turn it all the way down, and I'm going to take sharpness and I'm going to turn that a little down, and I'm going to get a fairly big brush and I'm going to brush on the water. You can see it's blurring it out and taking some of the highlight away from it, which I really didn't care for. Get in here a little bit. Now, that's pretty good. I like that. Maybe in here a little more. If you hover over the button of what you just painted, it'll come up with a mask over the water, where in this case the water where I painted, and I could see that I missed a couple spots. So I could come back and paint over here. I could paint over here. Okay, that's done. Close that up. Now, the only other thing is the lighthouse looks kind of drab. So actually, I think I'm going to add some little light on the lighthouse. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to do another brush. I'm going to reset it. I'm going to click this drop down and put exposure. I'm just going to bring the exposure up maybe less than half a stop and see what happens here when I do it. Yeah, I kind of like that. See, kind of a, you know, the lighthouse isn't perfectly uniform in color. It's stained. And I'm going to brighten up some areas of it, make it a little more interesting. And there, I like that. Now, the other thing, now I added contrast and some clarity after I went into the detail slider and did the noise reduction. And I just want to double check the sky, bring it to 1:1 and look at it to make sure that I don't have any noise introduced. And I do see I did introduce a little more noise. The way I think I'll get rid of that is I'll just brush it out again. And what we'll do is we bring out the brush again. We're going to do a new one. We're going to hit reset again. And this time I'm going to bring the clarity down a little bit. No, actually I think I'll leave clarity alone because I want the really distinct layers of the clouds to show through. But I am going to turn sharpness down and noise down. And get a really big brush. And we're just going to paint now on this. And you almost can't see anything. But when I, probably in the video, you really can't see it at all. But it's taking away some of that pixelated noise, that grainy looking noise that was in there, and making it a little more noise free. But it's not affecting the detail, which is what I was hoping for. Let's see. It's taken a second for my computer to render. And over there it looks like I missed. Okay, that's done as far as I'm concerned. And as I zoom in, I could see that grain noise is totally gone now. So I like that. Now the pretty much the picture is finished as far as I'm concerned. I do, as I usually do, I like to add a vignette. I go to the effects, and the very first slider, the amount. If you go to the right, you'll get a white vignette. If you go to the left, you get a dark vignette. And I'd like something about there. And that's it. That's I processed this picture from a color, raw file into this. And if I hit the Y key on my keyboard, I'll get the before picture and the after my processing. And it's to your own taste. I wanted the sky real dramatic, is to look like a storm is rolling in. And as you could see, it was pretty pleasant day actually. But I totally changed the flavor of the photograph by doing that. So that's it. That's how you process a photograph in Lightroom 5 into a black and white. And hit the Y key again, and we'll come back to this. So in part 5 of this series, as I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to deal with this detail panel and show you what all these functions do and how you could adapt it to a photograph to get the optimum sharpening and noise reduction. And until then, thanks for watching. I really appreciate everyone's support. And stop over to anthonymorganti.com. I got some articles over there and more videos, to help you with your photography. Thanks again.